Welcome. My name is Dan McElroy and I'll be your guide to the wonderful world of programming using Visual Basic. Visual Basic provides a collection of objects in its toolbox that can be placed on a form. The Visual Basic form provides the layout of what the Visual Basic program will look like when it's completed and is run by the user. This sample program includes the following objects that were selected by the programmer from the toolbox. This Visual Basic program uses a label to put text on the screen. A text box is used to provide the opportunity for the user to type something in. There are also a couple buttons and a display to indicate pass or fail. Each of the objects from Visual Basic's toolbox already have properties, meaning data and attributes, and methods, also called code, functions, subroutines, and procedures, that will do things to the object or respond to events that happen to the object. Visual Basic has two main modes of operation. There is the developer mode, and a Visual Basic program is created by designing the form. This is what the program looks like in Windows, and inputting the code to make the program work. The other main mode is the run mode. Here you can debug, execute, and test the program with known values to make sure it works properly, and then publish the program for other users to run the program. When in the developer mode, there's two main windows. There's the design view, and here the programmer places objects from the toolbox on the form that will be displayed when the program runs, and also the code window. The programmer writes the code that will be executed when the program runs. In the design view, when developing programs, select an object from the toolbox, then use the mouse to draw a rectangular area on the form to select its size and position. In the designer view, the most common objects from the toolbox include label, which is used to place text on the form or used to display the results to the user, a text box to get input from the user of the program, buttons to make something happen in the program, and a picture box used to put a picture on the form. The properties window can display either properties or event handlers. The properties or event handlers can either be displayed by category or alphabetically. I prefer the alphabetic display. So during these videos and other discussions, it might be easier to follow along if you also select the alphabetic display. When you are in the design window, double-clicking an object opens the code window with an empty event handler subroutine. The programmer can then enter the code that is to be executed during the run mode. For example, the first event handler subroutine in the example below shows the code to be executed when the compute button is clicked. When entering code, you must be very careful that you only enter the program between the private sub and the end sub lines provided by Visual Basic. If you modify or delete any of the lines provided by Visual Basic, you may need to start your project all over from the beginning. You can easily switch views between the design window and the code window by clicking the tabs at the top of the window. The view menu selection can also be used. Here comes the fun part, putting together the Visual Basic program and making it run. I will be following most of the steps of the system development life cycle. First, define the project. Then we'll develop an algorithm. Convert the algorithm into code, debug and test the program, document and submit the report, and I won't be covering how to maintain the program or project obsolescence because this probably is not a big enough project to do those things. The first thing that happens is the project must be defined. The project definition typically is written by somebody in the marketing department or an executive. It is usually written in English and does not contain any information on how to implement the program. For example, for this project, you have been asked by the DMV to create a program that inputs the applicant's score from 0 to 100 and displays pass if the score is equal to or greater than 70 and displays fail if the score is below 70. You also need to provide a way to clear the input and the pass-fail message. We then need to develop the algorithm. We'll define the layout of the program when it runs. This is usually something we just draw by hand, and then define the inputs and the outputs and figure out how to get from the input to the output. For a large project, the person who develops the algorithm may have the title of System Architect. We now need to convert the algorithm into code. To implement the program in Visual Basic, start Visual Basic and create a project. Add objects to the form, set the properties for each form, name each object, and set the Accept button and Cancel button. Enter the program into the code window and fix any typing errors. Start Visual Studio, select New Project, select Visual Basic, Windows Form Application, and set the name to PassFail. Make the Toolbox and Properties windows visible. And set the push pins to the down position to stop the auto hide feature. To undock a window, grab the title bar and move it around anywhere on the screen. To dock the window, grab the title bar and move it to one of the docking positions. To create the score label, select the Label tool, draw a rectangular area on the form where you want the score label to be positioned, and then set the text property to Score. To create the Score text box, select the TextBox tool. Draw a rectangular area on the form where you want the text box positioned. To create the Compute button, select the Button tool. Draw a rectangular area on the form where you want the Compute button positioned. Set the text property for the button to Compute. You can just repeat the same steps to create the Clear button. Or you can just do a copy-paste of the Compute button and then move it to where you want it on the screen. The nice thing about the copy-paste method is now you have a button that is exactly the same size as the previous button. Set the text property for the Clear button to Clear. We can use a label to display the results of the pass-fail message. So select the Label tool, draw a rectangular area on the form for the result label. Set the following properties. Set auto size to false. The background color, called back color, set that to green. Set the foreground color, this is the color for our text in the label. Set fore color to white. Set the text to pass, P-A-S-S. Set the text align to middle center. And set visible to false. That way, nothing will be showing up on the screen when the program is running. I know it's still there, you can see it when you're developing the program, but when the program initially starts off, it will not have a pass showing. It is important to give each object a meaningful name. The code section refers to these objects by their name. It may seem easy to just use the default names that Visual Basic provided in a simple project like this, but what happens if you have a very large project? What is label 17? When I give names, I also want to make sure that I identify the object type and also give it a name. For example, in our program, we have something called score. So there's a label that says score, and there's a text box which is being used to input the score. So I'll call the label score LBL score and the text box TXT score. To start off, let's name the form itself. Select the form by clicking on any area of the form that does not have any other object. Select the name property and set it to FRM PassFail. The first 3 letters I did in lowercase, and then I capitalized the first letter of each English word. It is very important, do not put spaces in any of the name properties. Spaces are not permitted. You may need to scroll to the top of the Properties window to find the Name property. Now we can name each object. Select each object one at a time by clicking on the object and set its name property. Here is a list of names that I may be using in the code section of the program. For example, label 1, I'm changing that to LBL score, text box 1 to TXT score, button 1 to button compute, button 2 to button clear, and label 2 to LBL result. Verify that each object is named. You can display the list of objects by name by clicking on the small down arrow on the line below the word Properties in the Properties window. You can also use this drop-down box to select an object. It sure would be nice for the user if they could just type in the score and then press the Enter key instead of having to use the mouse and move down to the Compute button and click that button. The form has a property called AcceptButton. By setting this property, we can set AcceptButton to be the Compute button. That way, when somebody presses the Enter key, it will activate the same code as the Compute button. The form also has something called CancelButton. We can set the Cancel button to Clear. That way, pressing the Escape key will also activate the Clear button. We also can create the code in the Code window. The code is the action. So in English, an action word is a verb. This is sort of like verbs. We need to define the code to be executed when the user clicks each of the buttons. These are events that occur for the button. The code to be executed as a result of these events is called an event handler. We're going to have an event handler for the Compute button. We'll have a separate event handler for the Clear button. While you are in the Designer window, the easiest way to get to the Code window is to double-click one of the objects. For example, double-click the Compute button. This will cause the Code window to open with an empty space for private sub button compute _ click. Then enter the code for this event handler. Make sure that you only type between the lines private sub and end sub. If you mess up any other part of the code that was generated by Visual Basic, you may need to start the project for the beginning. That isn't a lot of fun. The code here can also be downloaded from the website. To get more real estate on the screen for typing in my code, I'm going to activate the Auto Hide feature for the Toolbox and the Properties window. Let's type in the code for the Compute button. After the code for the Compute button has been entered, we can enter the code for the Clear button. To do this, easiest way is to go back to the Design view, click on the form, double-click the Clear button, and this will bring up the subroutine area for the event handler for the Clear button. At this point, you need to fix any typing errors. The most common error at this point is not using the exact same name as when the name property was entered and when the object name is used in the code. Look for a wavy underline and then fix those. You may need to either fix it in the code window or in the design window. Now that we have everything entered, let's see if it works. We need to debug and test the program. Start the program by either clicking the Debug tab and selecting Start Debugging, or just press the F5 key. We need to test 4 things: the score below 70, the score equal to 70, the score above 70, and the clear button. So make sure you fix any problems before you submit the lab report. A text document for the lab report is provided. Most of the lab report for this first project is already filled in. You need to complete the following sections: the test and results table. What happened when the program was run? Discussion, a brief discussion of how you created the program and solved any problems. Program output, screenshots of the program output. Program listing, the Visual Basic code for the program. On Canvas, click the link VB PassFail labreport.doc, save the file with a new name, submit your own lab report, not a copy of someone else's lab report. If you use Apple's Pages or OpenOffice Write to create your lab report, you need to export the file as either a Word or PDF document before uploading to Canvas. You can do this by clicking File, then Export As, and then select either Word or PDF when saving the file. All your lab assignments should be submitted using Canvas. Make sure you click the correct link on the class Canvas page for your assignment. Select the correct file you want to upload, click the Submit Assignment button, and verify that the file was sent. Easiest way is to click the next button at the bottom of the page to go to the Submit Assignment page on Canvas. Click the Submit Assignment, click Choose File, and locate the location you stored your lab report. Select that file. Click the Submit Assignment. The rubric identifies how the assignment will be graded. It might be good sometimes to look this over just to make sure that you got everything covered. This one's not too complicated, but lab reports in the future may have a lot more details that you need to look at. You can verify or resubmit your assignment if you make changes. I only see the last submission. Congratulations on completing your Visual Basic assignment. Refer back to this lab assignment when working on future labs for instructions on creating a Visual Basic program and instructions on how to upload a file to Canvas.